Finally, it has occurred. Potentially the last big transaction in the 2019 offseason has just gone through, and Russell Westbrook now finds himself playing for the Houston Rockets, and in return the Oklahoma City Thunder will receive not only Chris Paul, which we're going to talk about that, but 2 first rounders, top 4 protected, and 2 pick swaps, one being top 4 protected, the other one being top 20 protected. Now personally, I'm happy I slept on this trade because my original reaction to this transaction wasn't that good at all, and I honestly believe if I had recorded my original reaction to this trade, I would have immediately regretted it, because looking back at it now, I honestly understand why both teams made this transaction. Now, I'm not saying that OKC or Houston came out as big winners, nor am I even saying I'm choosing one team preferably over the other during this transaction, because there are both some massive risk that both teams are acquiring during this trade, because both of these teams, through many perspectives, have lost this transaction. However, when you actually look at it, it's a decision that both teams may have been forced into, which is why I actually like this trade. For starters, let's talk about the Houston Rockets, because OKC, there's just so much to unpack with that organization and what they actually received throughout the entire summer. So when it comes to Houston, I'm going to be a bit optimistic for Westbrook and the type of player he is, because I feel like over the past several days now, ever since Paul George's demand to be traded, there has been this misrepresentation on who Westbrook is as a player. Regardless of his flaws and what he doesn't bring to the table, at the end of the day, Westbrook is so productive that he can still be considered a top 15, or even if I was being harsh, a top 20 player in the league. That is something that Chris Paul is not. And so I don't understand how we got to the point where so many people are casually forgetting that, but at the end of the day, Houston did receive the best player during this transaction. And honestly, that may be enough to justify trading Chris Paul for Russell Westbrook. And in my opinion, it is. So to be fair, again, I understand why they made the transaction, but the rest of the things that now Houston has to deal with is definitely concerning. When it comes to Russell Westbrook, everyone knows that he is a ball-dominant guard. This holds true even last year when Westbrook decided to take a step back to Paul George in the offense, and yet by the end of the season, he still dissolved into this ball-dominant guard who can only score in a handful of ways. Now, a huge reason why he's so ball-dominant is due to his lack of scoring potential, because let's just be honest with ourselves, Westbrook only can score efficiently in 1 or 2 ways, one of which is attacking the rim, and the other one is in a handful of mid-range jumpers that he takes at the elbow, which is why this marriage is so confusing, because by many accounts, the Houston Rockets are a heavy analytics-based team, and Russell Westbrook, by even more accounts, isn't a analytic-friendly type of player. He isn't a great three-point shooter by any metrics. Last year, he was god-awful from the free throw line. He turns the ball over at a historic rate, and again, he needs the ball in his hand. Pairing a player like that next to James Harden just doesn't make any sense, because Harden, over the past 2 to 3 years, has really perfected this concept of trying to maximize each possession at his disposal, and a lot of that just comes down to him attempting, or at least getting some type of good look from behind the arc, or trying to draw a foul. Furthermore, even if I were to be a bit optimistic about Westbrook potentially taking a step back in the offense just like he did last year, more than likely we're going to see a dip in productivity from Westbrook in his play, which is definitely concerning, because as time continues to progress, the type of player that Westbrook will eventually become is frightening. And that's another huge reason why I'm not a huge fan of this transaction, because Westbrook having 4 years left on his deal and the amount of money that he's getting paid is just... It's laughable when you actually look at it. We're talking about a player who's going to receive $40+ million in the last 2 years of his deal. And again, we're talking about a hyper athletic guard who relies not only on his athleticism, but his ability to get to the rim and finish. A lot of those attributes to his game that he depends on pretty heavily will start to deteriorate as he gets older, and that's only natural. Now, for the people out there who want to say I'm being too harsh on this team, they're still going to win around 50 to 60 games. That's true, but the reality is the way that we're going to judge James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and even Mike D'Antoni at this stage of their career isn't based in regular season success. Because to be completely honest with you all, James Harden and Mike D'Antoni has proven time in and time out that if you just give them some shooters, that they will produce 50 plus wins in the regular season, and they should receive all the credit in the world for that. However, we have seen both of those entities, as well as Russell Westbrook, in postseason runs fall short thanks to their incompetency, their lack of innovation when it comes to offense, and their inability to adapt to certain situations that they find themselves in. And finally, and possibly the biggest reason why I'm not a huge fan of this transaction, is what Houston gave up to receive Russell Westbrook, which is a great transition to OKC. Now, when it comes to acquiring Chris Paul, I'm going to be very optimistic for the Oklahoma City Thunder, because I'm just assuming that they have some team that is willing to take on CP3 in his contract. Because more than likely what happened behind the scenes is that there were some suitors for Chris Paul, but the return for him in the trade was so insignificant that it really wasn't going to help Houston in their pursuit of winning a championship. So for OKC, they don't really have to worry about that, because if they take on some bad contracts, as long as they get some draft picks in return, that will be fine. However, there have been a lot of people assuming that OKC is just going to buy out Chris Paul. And let me just tell everyone this right now, that would be the dumbest thing I have ever seen in my entire lifetime. The reason for this is because the only reason why OKC started down this very slow but steady slope of deterioration when it comes to the talent that they possess had everything to do with the ownership not willing to pay luxury tax, or at least be a repeat offender when it comes to luxury tax. And to the credit of the ownership of OKC, that is a very, very steep bill that really no one in the NBA wants to pay unless it guarantees them a championship. So again, keep in mind, that's the reason why they did not keep Harden. So it just would not make any sense 7 years down the line, when they're not competing for a championship, that they were willing to buy out Chris Paul's contract, who, mind you, is still owed $125 million. And even if Chris Paul came to an agreement to only be paid $100 million, they would still have to stretch out his contract for 7 years, and for the next 7 years, pay him $15 million. Granted, that doesn't go towards his salary cap, so it isn't held against them, but at the end of the day, paying an extra $15 million per year for the next 7 seasons, that doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I don't believe they're going to buy out Chris Paul. I would actually go as far as saying they'll just keep Chris Paul on their team before they buy him out. Now, when it comes to the draft picks that OKC received, I actually like the 2026 first rounder, even though it is top 4 protected. You don't necessarily know what Houston's going to look like that deep into the future. But outside of that, the rest of the picks more than likely will be late first rounders, and I highly doubt if OKC even use their rights to swap picks, because more than likely they will be moving down in the draft. And even looking at the big picture, I will give credit where credit is due to OKC. They have received a lot of draft picks and potential assets in both the Russell Westbrook and Paul George transaction. But at the end of the day, they're still losers, because the odds of them drafting anyone coming close to Russell Westbrook or Paul George with any of those picks, or even Serge Ibaka, James Harden, and certainly Kevin Durant, is slim to none, let alone having all of them on the same team with one another at one time. But please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. Who do you think won the transaction? Are you a fan of either one of these teams in this outcome? Personally, I'm not the biggest fan for either one of these teams, but I understand why they were forced to do it because of the situation that they were in. And until next time, I will see you all later. Peace.